Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for what is the last speaker in our Summer of BookFest speaker series. We're so excited that you were able to make some time on your Friday to come and listen to Renee Stevens share a bit with us about her book. But first, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Nicole Cook, and I'm the Executive Director at the Western New York Book Art Center. And my co-host today is Rosemary Williams, who is our Education Director. She's going to be keeping track of all of your questions as we go and popping in to ask Renee in context throughout her talk. So make good use of this chat box as we're going along. Feel free to ask lots of questions. For those engaging with us for the first time, the Western New York Book Art Center is an arts and cultural nonprofit. We're devoted to printing and book-related arts, and that includes everything from screen print to origami, bookbinding, letterpress, and more. We're located in the heart of downtown Buffalo, but we've been serving our community with an online shop and virtual programs throughout the COVID shutdown. So please be sure to check out our website, wnybookarts.org, to see what else we've got going on these days. This speaker series is presented by our friends at the Printing Industries Alliance, and Kim Tuzzo is here to share a little bit more about the great work that they do to champion print as a contemporary medium. Kim?
Thanks, Nicole. I'm Kim Tuzzo with the Printing Industries Alliance. We're a trade association for printers. We cover the territory all of New York State, northern New Jersey, and part of Pennsylvania. We offer different services to printers to keep them profitable and informed on current events, and especially these last 6 months, we were busy keeping them informed on a lot of things. But we also offer some discount programs and group buying programs, and we had a lot of fun this summer co-sponsoring the speaker series and featuring a lot of our members that do some really cool technology and old and new technology. So looking forward to hearing from Renee Stevens today. Thanks for joining us. Back to you, Nicole.
Thank you, Kim. Feel a little bit like a newscaster today. So without further ado, I'll introduce today's speaker, Renee Stevens. Renee is an interactive and immersive designer, educator, author, and speaker. She's an active member of AIGA Upstate New York, who happens to be our marketing partner for Summer of BookFest, and she serves on the board as the Director of Education. Her creative work focuses on innovative ways design can help overcome learning disabilities and create more accessible and inclusive learning environments. For over a decade, Renee has run her own interactive design studio. You can find her teaching at the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University, where she is the Associate Chair of Visual Communications Department, overseeing the undergrad and graduate level design programs. In 2017, she was named Educator to Watch by GD USA. She's been invited to speak around the world about her work in XR. Renee is also the author of the book Powered by Design, which she's here today to tell us all about. Renee?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, especially on a Friday during your lunch hour for some, so depending on where you are. I'm really grateful to share some insights with you about the creation of Powered by Design. And as they mentioned before, thank you so much for the warm welcome by Nicole and Kim and everyone. I love questions. So I'm a professor, so I'm used to questions throughout every time I'm in the classroom. So feel free to use the chat, and I'm gonna be answering questions throughout. So if you have anything at all, I'm happy to answer them. All right. So we're here to talk about Powered by Design, and Powered by Design is the book that just launched, or just was released in June, the end of June 23rd this year. And I started this project almost exactly 1 year before it was released. And as you can imagine, the world and the state of where things were when it was released was a lot different from where it was when I started. So it's been quite an experience, and I'm happy to share any and all details, anything you're curious about or want to know more of. That's why I'm here, and I'm happy to share. So the first and part of the book that I wanted to talk about a little bit was just the idea that I set off to write a book but at the same time, I also got to design it. And that was what made the experience even more unique. I got to share my world and my loves and these passions where I love to educate and inform people and empower. And I also got to pair that with my love of design. And so for me, just the culmination of all these worlds coming together in one single book. And so it's just an amazing thing that, you know, I'm just so happy to share with you. And of course, I still can't believe that we're here today because it's happened, and we'll be talking about that. So what I love most about words, and specifically writing as a result of those words, is how simple a simple quote or even just one sentence that you read can be. It allows you to filter and focus all of the thoughts that are going on in your mind, no matter what's happening in the world. And it just filters them towards one specific thought for one moment in time. And that's, to me, what was the most inspiring part about setting off to write a book, is because words have power. And by just taking those simple words and forming a sentence, you could formulate and help ideate and inspire the thoughts of the readers for that moment in time. And so to kind of bring that inspiration into what I'm sharing today, I'm going to be bringing you through some of the quotes and thoughts that drove these moments of the book process for you. So the first one is, remember why you started. And this is actually a quote that I have on my Post-it note right by my desk where I always was writing. And I wanted it to be in a really prominent spot because as you get focused on something and you dive deep and you get all these different things pinging you in different directions, it's really easy to forget why it is you started in the first place. So I wanted to make sure that every time I sat down to write, that I was focused on why, and remembering why it was that I set off to write this book. So to tell you why, so you can follow that journey with me, it really all started, I knew I really wanted to write a book. It was something that I've been aspiring to do for quite some time, but I wasn't sure what the book would be, and I didn't know when it would happen, and you know, all those things. So it actually came about from a conversation I had with someone, and I was teaching, I teach a class at the school I teach at Newhouse at Syracuse University, and someone said, what textbook do you use for that class? Now, this is a big class. It usually sees about like 800 students a year in this class, and they're all these students are in all different fields of the industry, but they're all going into like communication-based fields. And someone said, what book do you use for that class? And my response was, I don't, because I haven't found the perfect book that will work for that class. And so we've used some and they didn't work out perfect. So really I would need 3 or 4 different books to do what I had hoped would allow for one book. And so, of course that person kind of looks at me like, okay, so make the book, like create it. And that was the part of this, like the starting and like the wheels turning in my head on, how could I make a book that would fulfill all the needs for this introduction to graphic design course for emerging designers or people who will be working with designers or just want to know more about design, in the industry. And so I said, well, if I'm going to be going off and writing this book, I want to make sure I'm doing it right. So I looked at a lot of what some of the design books that I had been reading and kind of influenced my, professional career, and also just inspire me to like pick up and read from time to time. And I saw a hole, which is it took me a while to kind of figure out what that hole was, but the hole for me was seeing a need for a book that was really up to date with how graphic design is today, because it's changed so much in the last decade. And also I was just part of so many different conversations, whether in the classroom or, from my studio. I do a lot of freelancing and consulting work. And I was just part of too many conversations that brought up topics like accessibility and ethics and diversity and inclusion, and even history. They just brought them up a little bit too late in the design process. And I was like, there's something wrong with that. We need to have these conversations from the beginning. And the best place to do that is by starting from the very first design experience that you create. So I set off to write this book that would be more inclusive and celebrate diversity. And, you know, I wanted to have a book that was as diverse as the students in my classroom were. They come from all different areas of the world. They come from all different backgrounds, all different influences, all different, you know, thought places, you know, like they just have such beautiful, there's just such a beautiful thing that happens when lots of people from lots of different backgrounds get together and share ideas. And so I wanted this book to celebrate that. And also just to make sure that people were thinking about specific choices that they could make in the design process that would make their experience or their design more inclusive to a wider audience. Knowing you can't design for everyone, right? But knowing who you're designing for and making sure you're making it as inclusive and accessible to them. So that is a lot to drive a book. No, you know, no pressure, but that's really what that's what I think of every time I see my Post-it note, which is still up on my by my desk, that says, "Remember why you started." So if I ever forget or ever had a moment where I'm like, "Why am I doing this?" It was always quite clear, and I'd be refocused. So just really quickly, just want to show you a timeline just so you have an understanding of where I went with this process. So all said and done, it was exactly 12 months. I started in June and I ended in June. So I started in June of 2019, and I pitched the idea to my wonderful, wonderful publishers, Rocky Nook. And at the time I wasn't sure. I actually had been in conversation with multiple publishers. And to do so, to get to pitch that idea, I put together a book proposal, which included writing out the full chapter outline. And then I wrote a full chapter, so a sample chapter to send them, to show them that I could hopefully write this book. And I ended up starting with chapter 3. And that was really important. I didn't want to start at the beginning and I didn't want to start at the end. So really the middle of the book is really where, you know, you can kind of get a sense for the overall feeling and emotion of the book. So 3 felt like a good spot to start, and I did not write the book in order at all. And so it's kind of fun how it all works together in the end, but yeah, it was not written in order. So then in August, I received multiple contracts, and I had to go through and, you know, decide which publisher felt right to me. And to me, Rocky Nook was just, it was just like talking to people who I'd known my whole life. Like they just were so like easy to talk to, completely supportive of my ideas. And I just knew in my like gut instinct, I was like, this is where this is who I should be working with. So I signed the contract with them and was ready to go. The day I sent off my final contract, I started writing that day. And then later that month, the first thing they said was, okay, so, and I also agreed to, you know, design it at the same time. So the first thing they said was, okay, we need a cover design. And I'm like, okay, I haven't written the book. So trying to make sure, again, knowing why you start, and the book drive that whole thing. So the book cover. So having to really go through that process of designing a cover, especially when you haven't written the whole book yet, is probably one of the hardest things I've ever designed, but also the most fun. And then, yeah, researching and writing started in September. And then I wrote from September 1st pretty much till December 1st straight. Like that was my project. That was what I was doing every single day. I'm very fortunate that I was on a sabbatical, so I wasn't teaching that semester, and so all I could do every day was just work on this and do some painting in my house. And so that's basically, you know, I focused on this project and got it done in that time. Of course, that also means, you know, writing people for images and all that good stuff that goes along with it, which we'll talk about. And then, yeah, so I fully, my manuscript was submitted, it was fully designed, and yeah, fun little thing. So the day before I was supposed to submit my manuscript, I ended up in urgent care, and I brought my computer and my laptop with me, and I'm sitting in the waiting, and I'm like, I'm finishing this manuscript. I don't miss a deadline, so I don't even think my publisher knew that, because I was like, no, I'm getting this thing done. And last minute things. It was no big deal. Past the time, you had to wait for a while anyway. So everything was good, and got everything submitted on time. Then January through March of 2020, I got all my rounds of editing completed, and lots of back and forth, lots of different versions going back and forth. And then officially on March 6th, the book went to print. Now, if you look at the timeline of that, March 6th, we were in a totally different world than we were even March 12th, of 2020. So I'm quite grateful. I'm thankful that everything went as planned and the timeline went as it was supposed to. And then, in June 23rd, the book was officially released. So all in 12 months, all said and done. So the first part of the process was the research stage. And the research part is really fun to me, but it's something that I'm constantly doing. So I felt like it wasn't necessarily like a stage that started and stopped. It was more of like a constant. And this class that I'd been teaching specifically, that I kind of had in mind, like I was imagining the students in that class as my audience. And I've taught that class now for about 10 years. So the content and the research is something that I literally have been doing for 10 years. And I change it and I update it every year. And even the nights before I give a lecture or whatever, I'm always making it up to date with whatever's happening, in the world. It's this constant stage of research, but it doesn't have like a beginning or an end. But the quote that kind of drives me for research, and specifically like how I find books or articles that I want to read, is that everything comes to you at the right time, and to be patient. So obviously the book itself that I wrote, Powered by Design, that all came at the right time. But how books come to me is also a really fun thing that I've just kind of noticed. One of the books that I received that was really inspirational was The Shape of Design, and it was given to me as a gift. And it just makes it even cooler just to think, like, I just now give books to people, like not even for their birthday or whatever. I'm like, I feel like you need this book right now, or I hope that this is a good time. And it's because I truly believe that there's certain things that come to you at certain times. It's like you're just meant to read it at that moment. And this book was that for me. So, and it has a beautiful gold foil cover. So, it's beautiful to look at. But of course, the inside is almost like meditations for designers. And it was just exactly what I needed whenever I wasn't feeling, I couldn't just sit down and write. I could read and be inspired that way. Another really great book that is cited in the book Powered by Design is Creative Confidence. It's something that I had found this book a few years ago, and I still actually haven't finished it. So the way I read books is whenever I see the book like on my shelf or wherever, I just pick it up and I'm like, oh, it's meant to be that I'm supposed to read this, and I'll either pick up where I left off, or I'll reread a chapter that I had loved, or whatever just seems like I need to be reading it at that moment. And this is one of those books, and I keep it, I keep it out actually, and I just pick it up whenever I see it, and I have it a few extra minutes. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to sit down and read a little chapter or section. And this book led to other books. So this book cites some other books, and as I'm reading it, I pick those up as well. So this was the book that was cited in there, the back of the napkin. And so instantly, I add that one to my collection. And then, as soon as it arrives, I, sit down and read that for a little while, and then I keep it out. So as I walk by it and I have a few extra minutes, I'll read a few more thoughts. And then throughout the process of this book, I did a lot of research for the articles, and I also just did a lot of interviews with people in different fields, and just trying to open my mind to expand beyond, what I know about design and what I think the emerging designers of today need to know. And so I had this wonderful conversation with a woman, Jacinda Walker, and it was supposed to be like a half-hour interview, and we were on the phone for I think like 2 hours. And she told me I have to have this book. And I'd heard of this book, but I never purchased it before. I never read it. And of course I purchased it. She told me, I was like, it's meant to be. I'm going to get this book. And it's it's super great book. And it doesn't have anything to do with design necessarily, but it has to do with humans. And so the idea of bias and how designers need to be aware of their own biases in the design process was a huge component of what I was trying to get these emerging designers to start to know and understand, and also just be aware of. So this book came to me at a perfect time. And then I guess the research component for me kind of comes down to this Albert Einstein quote, which is, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So if I was ever at a point where I couldn't narrow it down, what I was trying to say to a simplest point, that to me, I hadn't done enough research and I had to be doing it more. So I just kind of kept this thought in the back of my mind. And if you couldn't simplify it enough that people could grasp it, then that's just proof to me myself that I need to make sure I understand it better. Any questions before I go to the next section?
Not yet, but we did have just a little comment from Tyra, I believe. She says, "I love Jacinda."
Awesome. Yes, she's a great person. It's great human. Also very big in AIGA, so that's great. Awesome. And she's in the book. She's quoted in the book, so that's great. So my next section is writing. So obviously as I was researching, also doing a lot of writing. So I'm a designer by trade. I'm not necessarily a writer, or at least I didn't, like that wasn't something that I, how I would identify myself as. I guess I can't say that anymore, but that definitely wasn't, I came at this from the design perspective. And so for me, I had to learn a little bit more about myself and what, I know my best creative practices and, finding the best time to design and create, but that's different than the way I think. So I do a lot of writing, in academia, I'm always writing articles and grant proposals and all that stuff, but obviously this is a little bit of a different audience. So I am a night owl, so I am always up late, and that's when I'm most creative. And that's really why I kind of stay up late, is because that's when I do my most creative work, and I can just, my kids are asleep, it's quiet in my house, and it's just my time to just like create something. And I can be thinking about that all day long, and then I'll come to the end of the day and I'll just sit down and just make it happen. But when I started writing, and I start trying to write at night, I literally fell asleep mid-sentence, just like a different part of my brain, and it just did not work. So I completely changed around my schedule, and I used to be up till, I'd be up at like till 1 or 2 a.m. designing, and then I completely flip-flopped it around, and I was getting up at 5 a.m. to write instead. And that just worked much better, but it took me a while to figure that out. So I didn't know that about myself. I didn't know that I was going to write better in the morning. So all of a sudden I was going to bed at like 10:30 at night and getting up at 5 a.m. 4:35 a.m. And then here I am in the morning. There was a thunderstorm in the distance, huge cup of coffee, and working and designing writing. I wrote the entire thing in InDesign into the layout. It's like, this has to be in the beautiful typeface with beautiful white space around it. Like I need to see it in context to really appreciate it. So this is pretty much how I wrote every morning, was that it wasn't too cold out on my porch, huge cup of coffee, and InDesign and me. What I learned most from my writing is that I never use commas correctly ever. So, if I go back, like I thought I knew how to use commas, but apparently not. So I had some very patient and wonderful editors. And honestly, if I had gone back through the whole thing, I probably would have just not put any commas in, and then just added them in where they told me to. Because, as going through the editing, as a designer, I did all the copy edits as well. And, going through and literally deleting or adding or changing commas was probably the biggest edits that I had. So anyway, I obviously in this sentence, I also use them incorrectly. So I learned really well.
Renee, we had a question from Cassie. Were you also teaching during all of this? I know you mentioned you had a sabbatical, but the timeline went probably past that.
Yeah, so my sabbatical was for the fall. So I wasn't teaching during September through December, and I started teaching back in January. So doing all the editing and stuff like that, I was back to my full course load and administrative stuff, all of that. Yeah. But not during my like heads down writing period. Yeah. Good question. just taking care of my kids and writing, and then painting my house. That's pretty much what I did for the month of September through December.
And we had a comment just about the commas from Kim. A good book about commas and other punctuation is Between You and Me by Mary Norris. She's an editor at the New Yorker.
Between you and me. So see, books come to me at the right time. I'm currently writing my second book, so I'm gonna make this up. I'm gonna get this comma thing down. So that's good. Between You and Me. And what was the author's name again?
Mary Norris.
Awesome.
And we'll save a copy of the chat too. So
yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
that will now be added to my collection. Thank you so much. Awesome. All right. So yeah, we'll move on from that. So where I wrote, I guess during that time, I just, to answer Cassie's question too, I guess I wasn't just doing that. I also was doing other things for my creative research as well. So I speak at different places around the world, and I was asked to go to Vancouver to speak at a conference all about augmented reality and virtual reality. And so a lot of my research, creative research, also brings me to lots of different speaking events like South by Southwest and you know, the VR AR Association and that kind of thing. So I do a lot of writing on airplanes too, or at least I had in the past. I haven't been going many places these days, but I spend a lot of time. I travel a lot to different places around the world, and I love that. It's kind of like a wonderful perk. I get to meet great people and see cool things. So I was on an airplane to Vancouver, and I was like, I'm just going to work this whole flight. And I'm like, well, this is not, like, you know, looking around the airplane, I'm like, this is not a creative spot. So I looked down until I looked down the window, really. So this was the view out my window, and all of a sudden, you know, my whole book perspective changed, and I got a lot done on that flight. So just kind of always thinking about, I wrote wherever I could, whenever I had time, and you got to make the creative. You got to just pay attention to the things that are around you, even if you're not expecting it to be inspiring. So a lot of my creative process is about like finding rhythms, and so that involves getting outside and away from the screen as much as possible. So before I would spend any time writing, I'd get up and I would either go for a run or a walk. And I'm not really a good runner, but I appreciate running. And so in everything that I do, I always look for like a rhythm or a pace. So I have a playlist of music that has, and I just find songs that have like similar pacings to them. So that really, it's almost like a meditative thing. It's just like having this ability to kind of move in rhythm, right? So it looks like I'm a really slow runner, but here's one of my early morning brainstorms. And I'm lucky that I have some really beautiful woods in the back, like behind my house, with some nice trails. And so this rhythm is really important to finding my creativity. So I told you I was a very good runner. I'm a very slow runner, as you can see. It's also in slow-mo, but that's something that's really important towards my creative side. Is before I have to put like a problem in my head and then like figure out what I'm trying to like work through, and then I just go for a run. And by the time I'm done, I can sit down and just the words come. And that's a really important part of the process. I also look for rhythms in other ways. Yeah, please.
Oh, from Kim, can you write on demand or do you wait for inspiration? It seems kind of like you're almost forcing the inspiration while you're running, or I don't know.
Well, it kind of depends. So, if there's a deadline, if I have to get something done, there's a little bit of forcing in there. But like sometimes if I know that I have to get something done, I'll purposefully go for a run before, because I know that that's going to automatically help. But sometimes if the moment's right, for some reason, thunderstorms, like I just love thunderstorms. Like I don't know why, but I can just sit there and write. Like those are really inspiring to me. So I don't know honestly why, but so I feel like you kind of have to be prepared to do both. So if the time works and you're inspired, like sit down and do it. But I have 2 little kids. So I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And if they need something and I'm inspired to write, like my writing's not happening because they're going to make sure of it. So And, you know, I also have to balance everything I'm doing. So a lot of it is, I know that this is the time for me. That's also why I got up so early, because it's before they woke up, my kids. So I'm just like, you know what, I got to make this happen in the time I have. So there's definitely a balance between like, okay, I got to make this happen, and writing when the time is right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good question too. So I look for patterns and rhythms everywhere. So sometimes when like going for a walk or run, you know, it's really easy to look down, but sometimes the answer is really when you look up and just looking in a different spot. And so this was an example of that. And finding rhythms anywhere else you go, like the rhythms of the waves, like that. I just sit there with a sketchbook and I can just write down like an entire outline for a chapter, just sitting there watching this. So yeah, rhythms and anything that kind of has like a natural beat to it, I find like extremely meditative, and those are the things that I just have learned to will get my creative juices flowing. And the other thing that I just love that helps me as I'm writing or like working through a problem is seeing how other people can be really, really creative in their fields. So this is a concert, it's Bon Iver, and these things on the top are mirrors. And so they have like all these little lights on the bottom, and they're just sending them up and they're reflecting off the mirrors, like right there. And just like that thought and the process that went behind that was just, it's like so inspiring for me, like whether I'm writing or creating in any way, seeing other people doing something that in a unique or unusual or different way. I just like, I look for those opportunities. And writing, as you can imagine, there's definitely highs and lows. And so there's moments where, you know, I'd be doing research or I'd be reading these amazing books about design. And of course you can doubt, right? But you, like, if, you know, like as this shows, it's like, no, just don't doubt. Imposter syndrome is real no matter what you're doing. But if you listen to those voices, then you'll never get it done. So just keep going. And a little bit every day is really my goal. The design process. The designing process was really fun for me because it's, you know, I knew the content so well. So like I said, the first thing I designed was the cover. And so this was kind of the iteration of some of the cover design. And when I started it was the original cover, or name of the book was The Power of Design. And that evolved through the design process, that I realized, first of all, I didn't like the because that was too hard to design. I'm like, I guess because I'm the author, I could probably get rid of that. And then also doing some other research about the power of design. I just liked that powered by design made it a little more of an active, like the people reading the book were a little more active participants in the title. And so that kind of helped it evolve. And then that led to the final design. Really inspired by obviously all the different colors, but like this idea of power and electric, and like being like electrically charged, like playing off the idea of power, but also kind of hinting at some other design theories and things going on in there, with obviously like the color wheel. I really like the circle, like the holistic approach to the design. So there's a lot of other metaphors in there as well. And then of course I got to do the layouts. So that's really fun, and creating some of the images that were needed for the book, as well as just laying out the whole book. So there's the kind of underlying grid system to keep every page consistent. I really wanted some nice white space on there so that it didn't feel overwhelming. And there is at least one picture on every spread. So I wanted it to have a nice balance between image and type. I also wanted like really easy, so having like the highlighted words, almost thinking about what a student might do, and instead of having to go to the back of the book to find the, you know, the definition, having it right there and accessible to them. So speaking of those images, I love to celebrate designers that I know, and so as well as learn new. So I have images from some amazing creative people, you know, right here in New York, in upstate New York, and there are just so many doing so many awesome things that you know, I had to celebrate their work and include them in the book so that the world could see what they're doing. And so some of these, you know, some of them I just like saw some projects they were working on, and I was just like, the world needs to see this. like this. And it's just really, and it had to tie nicely into your, the content that I was looking for the book. And then, so yeah, I started with some local designers, and then, working with designers that were inspiring to me, or that I thought would be really inspiring to the emerging designers. So, Jessica Walsh had just opened up her own studio. So highlighting Ann Walsh and some of the work she did with Sagmeister and Walsh. And then having Adobe featured some of their redesigns that they've done in the book, to make Acrobat more accessible. Timothy Goodman, had some great conversations with him. So it was a nice opportunity to meet people who inspire me, who are doing some great things in the design industry, and partner that with also work that was maybe the first thing that designers had ever created. So I also included some student work as well. Is there a question?
Yeah, we have a couple. One from Cassie. Did the page numbers matter? Like, did your publisher care how much the book would cost to print?
Yeah. They gave me an estimate based off of page numbers, and I was really worried about it because I was like, I want to make sure I have the exact right number of pages. I'm going to make everything fit. And they were very great. You're basically like, make it as long as you think the book needs to be, and then we'll go from there. So, I mean, I had a range that I had to deal with, but then, and obviously we have to work with like how many pages, how many folios and everything. But in terms of the cost and everything, that was all kind of taken care of in the beginning when I did my proposal. So once I made the proposal, I also estimated about the approximate page length and then how many pages per chapter. So I was kind of falling within that realm so that I knew it'd be within the budget. But every time I asked about it, like how many pages, like trying to figure out, should I force it to this number of pages or not? And they're like, no, just write the book. Just write the book and then we'll deal with it later. If we need to reduce some or whatever, we'll do that from there. But yeah, that's a good question.
And then I have another question from Nina. Did you have to deal with the permissions to use images, or did the publisher handle that?
Yep, so I did that myself. They gave me the form from the publisher, and because I was already working with all the designers and illustrators and everyone else, I was already in contact with them, so I had them submit the images to me, and then I had them fill out the form, and then I sent all of that to the publisher. Some publishers do it differently. Some people will help you get them. And on the second book, the book I'm currently working on, the publisher is more active in that. So it kind of just depends on the publisher. And that's a really good question to ask them when you're at the contract stage.
And then just a comment from I love, in all caps, Jessica Walsh, I think from the Ann Walsh from the slide before. Yeah. She's so active about socio-political things and making sure her art reflects it.
Yes, perfect. I agree. And also having a woman-owned design studio. I really wanted to highlight that. So there's advice in there about, to females or younger generation about starting your own business and that kind of thing. So that was also how I selected some of the agencies to feature in the book. Yeah, perfect. So I wanted to make sure that there was like a range of designers. So like, we have Jessica Walsh, she's very well known within the design industry, but I didn't want it to be intimidating. Like some design books, it's like you look at all these things and it's like, they've been designing for years, so of course it's good, right? And I didn't want it to be so intimidating. So I asked some students to also include some of their work. And so as students or emerging designers are looking at this book, like this is one of the first things she's ever designed. And so I wanted to make sure that there was like a mix of those kinds of things, and you could really see how it could be applied to an assignment in a classroom, or if you were trying to just expand your design skills on your own, that there was a range of people's work being featured and across the world and across the globe as well. Here's another student project that was featured just to showcase that, range. And it was really important to me to showcase designers from, all over the world, like I said, in lots of different languages as well. I mean, look at how beautiful this calligraphy is. And this is all in Arabic, and that's all hand lettering calligraphy in Arabic from this Iranian-born calligrapher. And, I found his work through some research and just fell in love with it. And then some fun things. This designer in France, I wrote him, and I know French, but it's been a while. So I literally spent like way too much time writing this a massive email. And I put it all in French, right? I was like, this is gonna be good. Like, I know, like, I'm like, if I wrote it in English, he may not write me back and whatever. And so I spent all this time, and he wrote me back in perfect English. So it's like, awesome. Well, that's great. So a lot of working with all these different designers from all over the world. I had to do a lot of translating from French and Spanish and Mandarin, Korean and Arabic, and I loved every minute of it. In Spanish as well. Oh, I think I said that. But then I also find inspiration in the world around me, or examples of what not to do in this case. And so I was like walking through the mall, and I saw this sign, and so I just stopped to take a picture to stop the bad design in the world, hopefully. And then I was literally reading my son a book one night, a children's book, and I was like, this is the example that I need for design thinking. Like, this is the thing I was trying to figure out how to illustrate. And so the next day I wrote the illustrator and the publisher, and they were super excited, and they joined Powered by Design as well. So you can find your images and your inspiration anywhere. And children's book, they have such good messages anyway. So this truck gets stuck, right? And so these two kids, they come up with the idea based off of the dog biting the balloon, that they're like, oh, we don't have to try to pull this truck out. We just let the air out. And so the idea is having different thoughts, in the design process, and how important that is. So with limited damage to the truck and to the bridge, they get the truck out thanks to that innovative thinking. So all said and done, just some reflection now that the book has been out, and the writing is done, the editing is done, and now it's out in the world. It's like a thing. That just to remind yourselves that no matter whatever project it is, whatever you've been working on a long-term project is awesome, but also you have to remember when you're towards the end or at the end that you once dreamed of being where you are now. And so that was a quote that I have to just keep reminding myself, because it's really easy to get caught up in the world today where I constantly have to be doing something. But it's really important just to take that moment of reflection for anyone, and no matter what your project is, to make sure you give yourself a moment to just kind of appreciate it. This is the moment that the book arrived in my house. My daughter actually took this picture, and seeing and holding this thing that you've been creating for almost a year at that point, you just have to take that moment, and it made it real, being able to hold it. It's like something different. Like, I'd seen it, I knew all those pages, but holding it in your hand makes the whole book process come to life. And that's probably my favorite part of the whole thing, or especially most memorable. And then seeing how it impacts other people. So just a couple screenshots of people holding the book on social media. Some of these designers are featured, some, past students, or someone just found the book and, wrote, quote from it, or that kind of thing. So that's just been really fun seeing how, now that the book is out in the world, how people react to it. And of course, with any design project, you're like, am I done? Like, it's out there in the world. And this is a quote that, again, I kind of always think about. I'm a recovering perfectionist and an aspiring good enoughness. Like, is the book perfect? No, because it couldn't be, but it was, good enough for the moment in time that it existed or was created. And of course, so much happens every single day that, of course, there's needs for, could I include more diverse work? Absolutely. Like, you could always, and I think we need to strive to do that. But for now, it's complete to the point of where it needs to be for the moment. So this is a quote that I thought I'd end, which is in the end of the book, which is, though it's best to strive to make your design timeless, some things will inevitably need some revisions as business and products evolve. So I like to appreciate that a design is done for now. just as the book is done for now. So who knows if we'll do revisions in the future, but it's done for now. And I'm just, taking that moment to reflect on the fact that this thing exists in the world. And since it's come out, I think that I know of, over 500 students have read it so far, just in my school. And so that's been really crazy because it's only been out for 2 months. And I'm happy to take any other questions, but thank you all.
So while we wait for some other questions in the chat, oh, here's one. And feel free to pop them in, folks. What was your favorite chapter or message in the book? A question from Cassie.
That's a hard question to pick a favorite. I guess one thing I should say too about the images is that every single image or designer in there, I have a story for each one. So I think that's what also makes it hard to pick one, is because I look through it and I have like so many stories interwoven to each section and chapter. But I think the ones that kind of push me out of my comfort zone a little bit, I think are the ones that probably stand out to me. So I don't know. I think chapter 2, which is designing for humanity. I think that if I had to pick, I think that'd be my favorite one, just kind of because going back to remembering why you started. I wanted to make sure that was a really important and a beginning, it's the second chapter. And I really wanted people to make sure they empathized with people who are unlike them and kind of push themselves out of their comfort zone. So I think that one stands out to me because it kind of culminates why I started in the first place.
And another question, kind of going back to the beginning of the publishing process, what is one piece of advice you'd tell your past self?
So there's lots of, the very beginning is like very much like about looking through the contracts and making sure protecting yourselves and also getting what you need to be successful in the project. So I guess one piece of advice would be just to make sure you're doing it so that it's worth your time. It's worth negotiating a little bit anyway, just to see, making sure you're getting your time and your investment into the book, compensated for, but also that you just ask. I wasn't sure if the publisher would say, yes, you can design the book, but I was like, you know what, I'm going to ask. So I did. And, they said yes. So I guess that's one thing I would just kind of reiterate is don't be afraid to ask, because it's always worth asking. Whether that be about, like compensation, like royalties or, any part of the process that makes you uncomfortable or not. Going back, I guess I would also suggest having someone else read it who knows what they're doing. Like a lawyer is a great person to be friends with, just to make sure, the publisher wants to help you, right? It's like supposed to be this mutual thing, and it is, and I was very fortunate. But having more, and I would definitely say having more than one contract so you could compare and contrast was also really an important part of the process, because I could see what some people were allowing and other people weren't. So because it was my first time, comparing and contrasting was really helpful.
And then how did you research, what publishers to even go to? Was there different publishers that you saw a book of and you were like, oh, that was published by this place, I want to see if I can go to be published with them?
Yes. That was part of research. So I just looked at a bunch of different publishers, and I submitted my proposal to some, and they just basically were like, this isn't the right place for it, which I mean, kind of some of it you already kind of knew that going into it. And also, I guess, knowing how long the book would be kind of determined, which publishers to look for or not. And then the field. So some fields specifically target specific audiences. So that's how I ended up finding Rocky Nook, because Rocky Nook, they are specifically to photographers, but they were also looking to branch out more and had just started and needing some people to create more books towards the graphic design field. And so that's how I ended up finding Rocky Nook, was because of my photography background as well as design. And then honestly, having conversation with them and different publishers, I mean, I reached out and just let them know like what I was interested in and that kind of thing. And I guess you just have to kind of go with your gut. Like I had some conversations and I felt like they were in it to make the book, but they weren't really in it to make it what I wanted it to be. And so just being able to see that I was like, nope, not the right one, not the right one. So I just kept looking till I found the right one.
We have a lot of great questions too. Let's see. So first off, do you know where the book was printed?
Korea.
Korea. And then that's something probably the publisher took care of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the publisher took care of that. And that's, they had their process, and I was actually okay with that because I loved that it was, celebrated the world. So that was great.
That's cool. Did you have a collaborator or person that you asked for feedback throughout other than your publisher or editor?
Yes, that's a good question. So I actually had some reviewers of the book, some different colleagues and friends of mine as well. So people who I knew would be interested in using the book in the classroom. And also I had a past student who had taken the class, also reading through it, and she read the whole thing and then gave me feedback at the end, and just to make some edits and things like that. But I had people who I thought were the target audience of the book read it, and then I also had people who'd be utilizing it as a resource, read the book and give me feedback. Yeah, that's a good question.
And then another question about collaborating. Did you consider collaborating with another designer on the cover, or was it important for you to create the imagery on your own?
Yeah, I guess I always am up for collaboration on anything. There wasn't really a lot of time for collaboration. Basically, because I was like, I can get this thing done and I'm going to get it done by March or December, kind of set the timeline for things. So for the publisher, they have the understanding of when everything needs to be out for marketing and everything. So they basically, to follow their timeline, I needed to have the book cover done by the end of August, I think it was, so that they could get it so that it would show up on, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the different bookstores. So they needed that pretty quickly, actually. So that kind of set the motion of like, okay, I have to just get this done. But yes, I had lots of different ideas for that. And actually the book I'm currently working on now is going to be more of a collaborative cover. So that's exciting.
Oh, cool. So another sort of design question. Have you been asked to design other people's books yet? Or do you do that in your freelancing sort of work?
Yes, I have not been asked that yet.
Well, probably then.
Yeah. Part of it, I guess, is time. I love the process and that's totally great. But yeah, I have not since this one, I have not taken on any more book designing. I think a lot of what I do is more on the interactive side of things. So that's been taking up a lot of my time, but yes, I would definitely consider it. How about that?
And then last question, because I do want to be mindful of everyone's time too. We have a couple minutes. This has been great so far with all these questions. What support for marketing is the publisher providing? A question from Nina.
Great. Yeah, they're very helpful in making, basically not making me like do things I don't want to do, but also, helping with opportunities. So, I did a webinar right after the book released, that they invited, their audience to, and have been promoting it through social media and emails, and they go to a lot of trade shows and a lot of things like that. So they do a lot of marketing that way. And they have a very defined market, so photography and designers. So they kind of go to the places where it makes sense to be marketing those specifically. But then, they've been connecting with me to be interviewed on podcasts and other places like that. So they've been really great in kind of going off of my cues, is like, how much do I want to be doing, or how much do I not want to be doing based off of time. So I mean, honestly, I can't say enough good things about them. They've done a really nice job of balancing what, I have time for, knowing I'm, teaching, full time right now. And then also making sure that it gets, the publication, like the marketing and publicity to make the sales. And a fun fact is that it's actually it was being translated into Italian. So apparently the Italian market is interested in it. And they helped with all that. I didn't do any of that.
So it looks like Rosemary lost her connection and dropped off. So I'm just going to go ahead and because we're at 1 o'clock anyway, we'll just sort of shift into the outro section. But thank you so much, Renee. This was awesome. I personally really connected with the part where you mentioned that you get motivated and excited by seeing other people be really creative. I mean, that really like resonates with me as someone in arts education, but especially as an administrator, right? Because so much of what I do day to day is about giving other people the access to their own creativity. So that was really exciting for me and definitely resonated with me very personally. So thank you so much for sharing so much about yourself and about your process and about the publishing side too.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
And then I just
feel
wanted
free
to
to reach out. Yeah, about any questions we didn't get to, feel free to reach out.
Yes, and thank you so much to PIA and to AIGA for their support of the Summer of BookFest speaker series. All of these videos are going to be available on our website in perpetuity. So if you missed any of the talks or if you wanted to watch your favorites over again or send them to other folks, they're all going to be on our website on the Summer of BookFest page. And while this is the sort of last event of Summer of BookFest, we have a lot of other items on our website like activity kits, we have videos, tutorials to download, and I would encourage you to sign up for our email list if you haven't already, because we're going to be making announcements about reopening soon. So it's a really good time to be in communication with us. We're also on all of the socials. We're pretty easy to find, Western New York Book Art Center, at WNY Book Art Center on pretty much everything. So that's it. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us for lunch. Thanks to Renee for this awesome talk, and I hope you all have a great long weekend.